Good morning and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Wednesday morning. We're going to get started with some local news for you out of Bucks County, where a former teacher and girls soccer coach is behind bars. Police say he sexted two students and sexually assaulted one of them. Fox 29's Lauren Johnson filed this report.
So students at Palisades High School will never see that teacher on campus again, nor will the women's soccer coach be allowed back on campus around those children. That's because he's facing some really serious charges. Here's a list of those charges, several counts of 6 major charges you see there, all of them serious but possible the most disturbing, especially if you're a parent: sexual assault by a sports official, sexual contact with a student, and corruption of minors. Not one, but 2 victims. The former teacher started this bad behavior back in 2013 when he started sexting a student. The girl was a sophomore at the time, according to a criminal complaint. The next year, in 2014, he escalated things, inviting the girl to his house to drink alcohol, promising her his wife and kids were not at home. And then in 2017, he chose another girl, also a sophomore, but this time he used a social media app to send his dirty messages. And then in 2018, when she was a junior, he sexually assaulted her on campus. Take a look at 39-year-old Christian Howard Willman of Coopersburg. He now has to find 10% of his $4 million bail for his freedom again. Yesterday, Willman faced District Judge Gary Gambardella in court after the criminal complaint was filed on Monday. And now law enforcement wants to know if there are more victims out there. Have you encountered this teacher? Were you on the soccer team, or any other experiences with him on campus at Palisades High School? If the answer is yes, they want to hear from you.
And in West Philadelphia, Good Samaritans rushed to help a mother stumbling in the middle of the road while pushing her baby in a stroller. It happened just before 2 yesterday afternoon. Surveillance video outside the laundromat on 52nd and Thompson shows the 28-year-old mother pushing her 2-month-old baby girl through oncoming traffic. Witnesses knew something wasn't right, suspecting she might be under the influence.
My concern was the baby coming across 52nd Street. It was going like 2 sides of the street, and I had to stop, and another truck had to stop also.
It appeared that mother and daughter were going to get struck by the vehicles because it appeared that the mother was under the influence of either alcohol, narcotics, or a combination of both.
You know when somebody's drunk? Yeah. So I said, oh my God.
That 2-month-old baby girl is in good condition, no injuries.
The mother is currently at the Special Victims Unit while police investigate. Her baby is okay. And in Washington this morning, President Donald Trump's son has agreed to testify before Congress. This as we're learning more about another big investigation into the Trump-Russia probe, as Doug Luzader reports from Washington this morning.
Well, President Trump's son has agreed to testify before Congress. Is that going to be must-see TV? This, as we're learning more about another big investigation into the Trump-Russia probe, how it started in the first place.
And these developments have angered both Democrats and Republicans.
Everybody's mad.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's mad.
Yeah.
It will not be must-see TV. Why?
It's not on
it's
TV.
Not gonna be on, it's not on TV.
Oh, come on!
That's right. This though is something that Democrats have really been pushing for a while, and it's a Republican Republican senator who is ultimately making it happen.
They have a deal. President Trump's son, Don Jr., has agreed to make a return appearance to Congress, testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee about a range of issues. But there are ground rules.
This is behind closed doors, so this is not going to turn into the sort of cable TV fodder with that some of the other panels have had.
While the committee is run by Republican Senator Richard Burr, Democrats are anxious to hear from Donald Jr., suggesting that he hasn't told the truth about contacts with Russians and a plan at one point to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. The president, on the other hand, is looking forward to another investigation.
I am so proud of our Attorney General that he is looking into it. I think it's great. I did not know about it, no.
Trump praising his Attorney General, William Barr, for pushing a new investigation into the origins of the Russia probe and whether figures within the FBI, for instance, spied on the Trump campaign. It's led by U.S. Attorney John Durham. But a number of Democrats say it goes too far, and that includes the leading Democratic contender right now for 2020.
An investigation of the investigators who are investigating whether or not Vladimir Putin and the Russians engaged in trying to affect our life. Give me a break.
All right, and we may be just weeks or maybe even days away from the release of an Inspector General's report that is also looking into the origins of the Trump-Russia probe. Mike and Alex.
Okay. Doug,
We'll be talking about this through 2020.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you.
It will never stop.
Thank you.
And in business news this morning, have you ever wanted to kindly tell your Uber driver to shut up? Now you can, kind of. The new feature that will ensure peace and quiet in some rides, but not all.
Well, Mike, I bet this is probably the best news you've heard in a while.
It's pretty good. And now I'm going to seem like a creep here, Tracy.
Will you?
Well, there's just sometimes.
Or just a curmudgeon?
I'm normally doing business on my phone or something like that.
Oh, is that what it is?
When you order up an Uber,
Yeah.
sometimes you just don't want to talk.
Or you talk for a living. You talk for, hours at a
it's
time.
true.
So maybe you just need to
True.
rest it a little bit.
So you know how it goes, Tracy.
Yep.
You take Ubers. Sometimes just driving around is boring, and you want somebody to talk to, so the drivers often engage in
chat.
conversation, right? What do we do about it?
Well, if you are tired of the talkative drivers, there is now a new in-app feature in Uber that will allow you to select the quiet mode, which alerts the driver to keep the conversation to a minimum.
Oh, God.
But the only catch here is that this is available to the Uber Black or Uber Black SUV selection.
Aw.
So that's a little more expensive.
Yes.
It's the more premium option. So you are going to be paying for that peace and quiet, paying a little extra. Maybe that's what Uber wants. They want people to be encouraged to select the more premium options. But in addition to that, you're going to be able to select the temperature of the vehicle, also alert the driver if you have any bags with you. Maybe you're going to the airport. So there are lots of options. I want to know when they're going to make a selection for music. That's something, maybe turn off the music or change whatever it is they're playing.
Just this morning I ordered my Uber. It was about 4:45, and for the first time that option came up on the screen.
What, quiet
temperature?
mode?
Really?
Oh, temperature.
Temperature, and then there were two others, but I was in a hurry, so I didn't see what they were. And it might have been temperature. Temperature and music.
And music?
And music. But I quite often.
Maybe. Was it an Uber Black?
It was Uber Black.
He does Uber Black. I'm the Uber X girl over here.
Me too. I'm the cheap Uber.
Yes.
So yes, it was definitely the quiet mode and the number of bags and the temperature. That's what you saw. That is what will appear.
So it'll just, I guess, as soon as you accept it, then, like, was it after you clicked on the request?
It was after everything.
Okay, then it says you want quiet modes. Because I want to know at what point do they get the message that, hey, I don't want you to talk to me.
But I don't think I'll ever do it, Tracy.
Why not?
Because it just sounds like you're so snooty. And don't you think they'd give you a lower rating? Oh, this jerk didn't even want to talk to me.
Oh.
Huh?
Maybe.
But what if you're
What about when the drivers are talking to someone else on the phone? That's also what I don't like.
Really?
When they're
I don't
having
mind
a
that.
conversation.
No, I don't want
It's
you
not
to-
with you. It's with someone else.
No, I don't want that.
Just don't.
Really? Why not? Is it because it's annoying
I don't
or
want
loud
that
or
either.
something?
Well, it's distracted driving
Yeah.
for
Oh,
one.
that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Usually they have headphones or they do it on the speaker
That's
or
true.
something. But when I was having voice issues, though, it was very frustrating because people tried to talk to me and stuff, and I couldn't talk. And I felt bad because I thought they were, yeah, I was like, listen, I got nothing.
All right, Trace.
Hopefully they won't take it bad.
See you tomorrow.
And moving on to your Fox 29 Weather Authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for a warm and pleasant Wednesday following a pretty damp and dreary start to the week. Temperatures will reach a high of 72 degrees amid sunshine and a few afternoon clouds. So we're drying out after a few days of rain and doom and gloom. Temperatures will remain in the mid to upper 70s for the remainder of the week, but rain will make a comeback on Sunday with thunderstorms expected to develop in the afternoon. And here's a look at current temperatures in our region. We have a mild 55 degrees in Dover, 57 in Wildwood, same in Atlantic City. nearly 60 degrees here in Philadelphia and a chillier 50 degrees in Mount Pocono. And looking ahead to your 7-day forecast. Again, drying out today, this Wednesday, 72 degrees is the high. And we may get an AM shower tomorrow, but for the most part of the next few days, mostly sunny, temperatures in the mid to upper 70s. And then the chance of showers returns toward the end of the weekend into next week. But pretty nice weather as the Philadelphia Phillies are at home, wrapping up their series against the Brewers. And don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 29 Weather Authority app to have the latest forecast right at your fingertips. And back to local news this morning. In Delaware County, after 2.5 months, an Upper Darby family has finally gotten an answer to who struck and killed their daughter. Yesterday, 53-year-old Darren Forrest turned himself in for the 6-year-old's death. Jennifer Portillo was walking home from school on March 1st with her family when the driver backed over her. Forrest faces multiple charges, including manslaughter. He's admitted he was drinking. The little girl's family moved to our area from Honduras. Police and the community donated money to send her body to Honduras for her burial. Her parents couldn't go, but say they are grateful. And in Montgomery County, a woman battling cancer has now been dealt another blow. She's the victim of a smash and grab burglary. 49-year-old Maria Terranoni of Hatboro has been fighting stage 3 breast cancer for the last year. She said she was finally feeling good and went for a walk with friends 2 weeks ago at Warminster Community Park. When they returned to their cars, they found their windows smashed and purses gone. Maria's credit cards, ID, and $2,000 in gift cards were all stolen.
After a year of just going through all these surgeries and treatments and fighting for my life, and then feeling like, oh, it's done. And then I felt like everything was taken away from me.
Within 10 minutes, the thieves had racked up $1,500 in gift card purchases. Warminster police posted a picture of the two suspects on its Crime Watch page. If you recognize them, call police. And in Camden County, residents are back in their homes after an air quality test was done following a gas leak in Winslow Township. Yesterday, gas was seen spewing from the ground for hours, forcing families out of their homes. It happened near the intersection of Egg Harbor Road and East Fleming Pike. Authorities say contractors who were working on the roadway struck the system's main. Four homes still don't have gas this morning as workers continue to make repairs. Also in Camden County, a police sergeant is being hailed a hero this morning. He saved a man preparing to jump from a bridge. Sergeant Christopher Sarlo says it happened last week after police received a domestic violence call. He found the man ready to jump off the bridge over Newtown Creek in Camden. He says the man was on the other side of a fence, leaning over towards the water and had a rope around his neck that was tied to the bridge. Sergeant Sarlo says the man was threatening to jump and he knew he had to find a way to talk the man down.
Eventually we were able to start building a rapport, talk, and find out we had some things in common, sports, things like that. I got him to tell me what there was for him to live for, and he said his son. So I found out he had a son. I'm actually having a daughter soon, so I was able to break ground with that.
After nearly an hour and a half, the man removed the rope and came down off the bridge. It happened after Sergeant Sarlo told him he wanted to make sure he'd be there to take his son to school in the morning. The police department is proud of Sergeant Sarlo, as is his sister, who works here at our station. And if you or anyone you know is in need of help, be sure to take advantage of the Americans for Suicide Prevention's resources, where they have, a 24-hour hotline if you're in need of help. And on Good Day this morning, pregnancy-related deaths are rising in the U.S., and the main factor is being black, according to reports that highlight racial disparities in care during or after childbirth. We invited Dr. Wadia Mullah, the director of obstetrics and maternal fetal medicine, and Courtney Hicks, as well as her 1-year-old, Rasiah. All 4 of Courtney's pregnancies were high risk. They joined Good Day to discuss this morning.
So we invited Dr. Wadia Mullah, the director of obstetrics and maternal fetal medicine, and Courtney Hicks and her 1-year-old. You've been hearing her from the beginning, Rasiah. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Now, Courtney, you said this was your first time seeing that PSA, but a lot of people have been reacting to it. What was your reaction? Because you've had 4 pregnancies that were at risk.
Yes, all of them was high risk. That's sad because every day is like you think of what could possibly happen, and you gotta be careful of everything, what you eat, how you make sure you make every doctor's appointment, because they doctors, they know exactly what's going on. We don't. We just know what we feel. So it's just a struggle every day.
And can it be difficult to tell? Okay, am I feeling something that's serious enough to go to the doctor?
Right. And then some things is like me, mine was high blood pressure. So I just had to know each symptom of high blood pressure, because a stroke, anything could happen.
And we do have some charts and some graphics, because that's one of the main problems that we have, is certainly with heart disease, stroke, and then there's so many women who are dying from really preventable things like infections after the fact. And I think a lot of women don't realize, doctor, that this can happen before, during, or after the time a woman has a baby.
Yes, it can happen up to a year. And it's interesting that it's so equally divided. It's like 30%. A little bit more before or during pregnancy, about 30% immediately after delivery, and then still 30% up to a year. And people think that after I have my baby, I'm out of the woods, and that's not really the case.
So what's happening here? Are people not going, bless you, Rasiah, are people not going to the doctor enough? Are they just, we're not aware of these numbers? What do you think it is?
Well, I think there's a number of factors involved. First of all, I don't think people understand what the risk factors are. Many people think that once they're pregnant, they're going to be fine and they're healthy. And the whole past history, medical history, sometimes gets lost. Providers may not be up on what we consider risk factors. I think people have barriers to care, getting to doctor's appointments, not seeing doctors frequently enough. Once a risk factor is identified, they can't come in and see us. So all of that gets kind of bundled up into the first part. And the second part is that once you have a baby, you have your postpartum visit 4 to 6 weeks later. Well, then you still have a whole year of risk. And those risks don't get identified. And I think there's a huge movement looking at that particular area as well as the first and second parts.
But there's also the factor that affects women of color more so. And why is that?
Well, I don't think it's clear. I mean, I think that we talk about barriers to care in terms of low incomes, medical risks. There's a lot of high-risk medical complications in women of color. There's also some people feel like it's a stress. It's the stress of everyday life that women of color have to experience that contribute to this.
But it's not just poverty, because you can look at people, celebrities that we've seen in the news who had very difficult experiences, like Beyonce, like Serena Williams, who had very difficult problems. And one of the things that's interesting in this trend, specifically with women of color, this can be people that are upwardly mobile. We're seeing that is a trend, and that's disturbing.
It is very disturbing. And we have different maternal mortality reviews that try to identify risk factors. I think one of the biggest risk factors is the stress of everyday life of trying to be successful in this world.
Are you saying that, Courtney? You had this with your first baby. You had a tiny baby, your first baby.
Yes, because that's when I first found out I had high blood pressure when I got pregnant with my first child. And I was for a regular doctor's appointment, and my pressure was extremely high, and I never left the appointment. Actually, I stayed, and I had an emergency C-section, and my pressure still didn't come down afterwards.
So you found out well into your pregnancy then? It wasn't like just at the beginning?
No.
What do you want other women to know right now that are watching?
I just want other women to know that doctor's appointments are very important. Like, you can't miss no appointment because any little wrong turn can cause you and your baby's death. And definitely the doctors, like, listen to them. They're not telling us anything wrong. They're definitely here for our best interest and taking care of us and our child. And just basically medicine. Because whatever medicine they put you on, not taking it can really affect your pregnancy.
And you have 4 examples of why it's a good idea to listen,
Yes.
because you have 4
Yes.
beautiful children.
Yes, thank you.
Ladies, thank you both.
Yes.
We really appreciate your time in getting this
you.
message out there. Thank you.
And thank you, Versailles. You were great. So talkative this whole time. It was wonderful. She's like, oh, now I'm going to get quiet. Not tonight. That's how it goes, doesn't it? Well, thank you, ladies. Okay, we're going to take a break.
And more in local news this morning. Pennsylvania is joining other states suing the maker of OxyContin. Pennsylvania is joining the other states in accusing the pharmaceutical giant of fueling the opioid epidemic. Attorney General Josh Shapiro says his case is unique, citing documents from within Purdue Pharma showing it new doctors were prescribing the drugs to known drug abusers. He says Purdue gave incentives to sales reps to sell opioids, and those who didn't sell enough ended up on probation. Or worse, fired.
Purdue took full advantage of the situation. They targeted doctors with unsavory practices. They lied to sell more drugs. And as a result, they pumped our Commonwealth with as much oxy as possible.
Purdue attorneys have said that states are only using portions of company documents to make the company look worse, and that Purdue Pharma only accounts for a small portion of opioids prescribed in the U.S. And more on Good Day Philadelphia this morning. Alabama legislators have given final approval to a ban on nearly all abortions, and if the Republican governor signs the measure, the state will have the strictest abortion law in the country. Attorney Jennifer Brandt joined Good Day this morning to discuss.
Big news late last night. Big news. Alabama lawmakers have passed a near total ban on abortion.
It's the most restrictive abortion measure in the country, making it a hot-button issue for Democrats and Republicans.
I apologize to the women of Alabama for this archaic law that we passed.
It's time for Roe versus Wade to be looked at again, and it's time that we address that issue.
The bill bans abortions at every stage of pregnancy and criminalizes the procedure for doctors who could get charged with felonies. There are no exceptions for rape or incest, only when a mother's life is in jeopardy. The bill now goes to Alabama's Republican governor, Governor Ivey, and so she's expected to look at it today, but she has up to about 6 days to sign it.
Yeah, it brings up all sorts of legal issues. That's why we need an attorney, and Jennifer Brandt, luckily, is an attorney. Hi, Jen.
Hi, how are you?
So what do we do now? So it's going to go to the governor's desk, I guess today, right?
Yes.
And she's going to sign it.
Well, they believe,
Yeah.
she hasn't commented on it, but the belief is that she will sign it.
Okay.
And it doesn't become a law right away. It's about 6 months. And during that time, what will probably happen is that it'll be challenged in the courts. The ACLU has already come out and said that they're planning a petition to challenge this.
As well as Planned Parenthood, I believe, has announced that they will.
Yes, exactly.
So how does that work? Is that basically suing the state?
Well, Roe v. Wade allows a constitutional right for abortion. And this law effectively says it's banning abortion because it's saying that you're not allowing abortion from basically the beginning of a pregnancy. It even goes further than the fetal heartbeat laws that we've heard about in some neighboring states.
Like Georgia.
Like Georgia. There's 4 states, I believe, that have the fetal heartbeat laws, which disallow abortion at about 6 weeks. But this is sort of when a woman finds out that she's pregnant, you wouldn't be allowed to get an abortion. Right.
That's it. So then it would go, if it does end up in a higher court, would it first go to the Alabama Supreme Court?
The likelihood is that it's going to be challenged in the federal court.
Oh,
That's
all the
where
way to
I
the top.
think, Well, not necessarily the Supreme Court,
Okay.
because the Supreme Court has already said that they're not looking to address this issue. And there are other cases, about 12 cases, I believe, that are already up, that are
Ahead of
moving
them.
up,
Mhm.
Through the Supreme Court, to the Supreme Court, that deal with the abortion issue. So this will be probably in the lower federal courts, challenged first in the lower federal courts, before it moves up the ranks.
But so eventually you have to go through the courts, go up to the ranks, and then get on the list of topics for the Supreme Court to
And
address.
whether or not the Supreme Court doesn't have to consider it, it's whether or not they will or they will not.
Which federal court would get it?
Probably the lower federal court. So
But-
there's a first tier, sort of a trial court level, a lower court, then an appellate court, and then ultimately the
But
Supreme
it could be
Court.
reversed in a federal court.
Yeah, it could. It could.
Could.
It could be, stopped as saying that this conflicts with Roe v. Wade and therefore is not constitutional.
But if it gets to one of those lower federal courts and they say, no, we're going to let this stand, then could the people who are against it, could they keep suing, or is that it once the lower federal court? Like, how does
Well, there's always ways to come out and try to challenge it in different ways. It can move through the Alabama courts too, but most likely, I think the idea of this and what the legislatures have said is they're looking to attack or challenge Roe v. Wade. That's the whole sort of idea behind this. Understanding that this is probably not going to go into effect right away. That's what they ultimately want to do.
But if the Supreme Court has said, that, hey, we're not ready to touch on this just yet, that means in the meantime, though, states individually can keep passing these laws.
And states are passing these laws, and the other way as well. New York passed a law allowing abortion and giving rights, even broader rights, with the idea all states are a little bit concerned that this is going to end up in the Supreme Court. So states are starting to enact all kinds of laws.
Real quickly,
either way.
the Georgia and 3 other states, the moment you detect a heartbeat, then you cannot have an abortion.
It's
after
usually
that.
at about 6 weeks.
5-6 weeks.
Yeah, they say.
Okay. A lot of people don't know they're pregnant for the first 5 or 6
That's
weeks.
right. That's right.
Yeah, I think that's the point of that one. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
All right.
This is big news, so we'll have to see if the governor signs it today.
All right.
And more on Good Day this morning. This month, it's time to celebrate inventors. So Good Day Philadelphia checked in this morning with consumer reporter Steve Noviello for a special edition of Save Me Steve.
You know what I want to see? I want to see a machine that would inflate 40 balloons in 40 seconds. I don't think that exists. Steve Noviello.
I want to see that too.
But maybe save it toward the end.
Yeah, we'll do that one last. Look, we're talking about ideas that come from regular mom and dad inventors just like you folks. These folks have seen a need in the market and filled it with a great idea. The first one is this right here. Ladies, help me out here. This is the Leopara makeup lighting system. So apparently quite a big deal for women when you're at a hotel and they've got bad lighting. Maybe you're out on the town and you want to sneak into the bathroom for a little makeup refresh and the lighting is really terrible. So these are reusable, rechargeable LED lighting strips that create a 360-degree patent-pending perfect makeup mirror. Each one of them totally rechargeable. In fact, the cord maintenance couldn't be better. It's one USB plug, 4 different chargers on it. They come in this carrying case, so super easy to throw in your carry-on or even in your handbag. Yeah, absolutely, right? So the inventor, I met her at the Consumer Electronics Show and thought, okay, this is actually a really cool idea. I know a lot of people who would really benefit from this. $89 buys it. Okay, next up, this is the OmniView, the brainchild of a mom and dad who actually have the exact opposite problem that I have with my newborn. Their newborn, a super quiet sleeper. So what does that mean? It means mom and dad are up all the time, going over to the bassinet, making sure that baby is still okay because they're just so quiet. So they invented this. It is a remote-controlled bassinet mirror. Now, you don't have to go over to the bassinet to see if baby's okay. You can just adjust the mirror from anywhere in the room with the remote control, and you'll be able to peek in without having to get up and go over. $60, by the way. All right, next up, and I heard you guys tease this one. This is called kid-proof. They say necessity is the mother of invention. Well, when Corey Listener discovered that his kids had spilled a strawberry shake in the back of his truck and then left it there, he thought, okay, I've got to come up with an idea here. This is a fabric protectant that uses nanotechnology to safely seal cloth and leather from food and liquid spills. So take a look. We've treated these onesies. You pour water on them, and look what happens. It just beads right off.
Isn't that
just
Gore-Tex?
beads right off, right? It's really incredible, right? So super safe, chemical-free. You apply it with the spray bottle, dries in just a couple of hours, and lasts for up to 15 washes and creates an impermeable barrier. This is the Saddle Saucer. Super easy idea. The inventor is actually from right here in North Texas. $10 buys you a set of 3. You choose the color. So this really kind of gives you an extra hand. Maybe you're sitting on the couch with your cup of soup, and now you need someplace for your crackers, right? Now I can do 2 things at once. Maybe it's an art project for the kids and you want a different places to put paints. Maybe it's chips and dip night. Super simple idea, and that's what I love about this invention. Again, $10 buys you 3. You choose the colors. And finally, every now and again, you come up with an idea that is so incredible that a big company says, we're going to license that. There's a guy named Josh Malone who's up here in North Texas who invented a product called Bunch of Balloons. These were self-sealing water balloons. Well, the folks at Zuru loved his idea so much that they licensed it. Of course, it became a global phenomenon. Now the same company has brought a revolutionary fast-filling, self-sealing technology to party balloons too. So you take this, they're already attached, right? You pop it into the filler. You can do up to 40 of them. You press a button, and on it goes. The balloons fill themselves up. 40 seconds, they're already pre-hung, pre-strung. Also works with helium tanks too, so you can have balloons floating around your party in just 40 seconds. Links to all these products from everyday inventors right now on your station website.
That was great.
That was some great stuff.
Thanks,
right.
Steve. Always does a great job.
And
Good to
some
see you.
useful things too.
And we're going to take you now to Washington, where the House Transportation Committee is holding a hearing on the Boeing 737 MAX planes, which resulted in the loss of hundreds of lives following a software issue. We'll take you live to that right now. Stay tuned.
New flight control computer operational program software and has developed flight crew training related to this software. On April 12th, the FAA met with safety representatives of the 3 U.S.-based commercial airlines that fly the Boeing 737 MAX, as well as the pilot unions for those airlines. And this unprecedented meeting was an opportunity for the FAA to hear individual views from operators and pilots. The FAA recently solicited public comment on a draft report prepared by the FAA's Boeing 737 MAX Flight Standardization Board. That board consists of pilots, and we use it to evaluate Boeing's proposed training associated with Boeing's proposed software enhancements for the 737 MAX. On May 6th, we initiated a multi-agency technical advisory board, or TAB, to review Boeing's MCAS software update and system safety assessment. The TAB includes experts from the U.S. Air Force, NASA, Volpe, and the FAA. And none of these experts were involved in the original certification of the 737 MAX. The TAB's recommendations will directly inform our decisions on the 737 MAX fleet's return to service. And next week, on May 23rd, the FAA will host a meeting of directors general of civil aviation authorities from around the world to discuss the FAA's activities toward ensuring the safe return of the 737 MAX to service. This meeting is part of the FAA's efforts to work with other civil aviation authorities to address specific concerns related to the 737 MAX, in keeping with the FAA's long-standing cooperation with our international partners. As our work continues, I want to offer this assurance. In the U.S., the 737 MAX will return to service only when the FAA's analysis of the facts and technical data indicate that it's safe to do so. This concludes my prepared statement. Welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for your statements, both of you. We're now going to move to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. Administrator Elwell, this week the Wall Street Journal reported that an FAA internal review tentatively determined senior agency officials did not participate in or monitor critical safety assessments of the 737 MAX flight control system. Also noted the FAA deferred to Boeing's early safety classification, and the subsequent analysis of potential hazards were performed with limited oversight by the agency. Is that report accurate? And if accurate, what explanation does the FAA have for, I guess, falling down on the job? Microphone.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Larson. I think you're talking about the Wall Street Journal article of yesterday, and we take all those articles and those charges or reports seriously, but frankly, there's nothing in that article that led me to anything that I'm aware of. So we'll certainly see what we can find out about it. But and I'll ask my colleague Earl if he's aware of what the article.
Before you get to Mr. Lawrence, so the article reported that the FAA's own assessment determined tentatively that senior agency officials were not involved in this assessment.
I'm not aware of an internal assessment.
Mr. Lawrence?
Reached that conclusion.
I'm not aware of the internal assessment that the article refers to.
Okay, well, we have some homework, and you do too. But I think it does relate to the next set of questions with regards to the ODA and the use of the ODA process. Mr. Elwell, you previously stated, it was reported that you stated, that a full reversion of certification activities to the FAA would require 10,000 additional FAA inspectors and $1.8 billion. I'm not here to argue whether it's one more, one less than that. But has the FAA considered moving back to the previous designated engineering representative system away from the AR system? And what would that cost be?
Chairman Larson, I don't know what that cost would be. I know that there are a number of investigations and audits, as several opening statements have pointed out, that are designed to look at the process. I also know that our risk-based, data-driven systems approach has, as Ranking Member Graves stated, has led to the U.S.'s safest system in history and in the world. I'm very, very careful to make sure that the results of any inquiries, investigations, audits bring us actionable information. I mean, as I said, we welcome those investigations. We welcome the audits. They make us better. But at this point, to say that we're willing to go back to something before we've gone through those investigations, I'm not prepared to say that. I really want to see what these investigations and these audits have to say about our processes.
So the current system with authorized representatives, however, has ODA participants reporting, I understand, to managers as opposed to engineers. And under the DER system, the ODA designees were reporting to engineers. Are you, through your assessment, looking at whether a change from reporting to engineers who can monitor engineers versus to managers who are looking more at budgets? Are you looking at whether that process needs to be changed? Is that going to be part of the Blue Ribbon Commission's look?
Sir, I'm not aware of any limit on what we're going to look at. We're going to look at everything. I would say that the Organization Designation Authority, ODA, as it exists today, is a process that's developed over decades. We've had ODA in one form or another since the beginning of the FAA. We've had delegation of authority since 1927. It's, the concept isn't new, it's the administration of it. In my mind, if we have robust oversight and we have all the protections in place to guard against conflicts of interest or undue pressure, which I believe we currently have, it's a good system. But it can always be made better. I mean, that's what we're all about.
And I'll just conclude on that point, though, that I guess putting the faith in the evolution of the system to get to where we are today isn't necessarily a positive assessment of the system that we have. Just because it has evolved since 1927 doesn't mean it's evolved to the place where it needs to be or should be, and it perhaps has over-evolved in this case, if you will. So with that, I'll yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Graves of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Raise your hand if you have a pilot's license in this room. Raise your hand if you have been flying a plane when the stick shaker's gone off. The stick shaker's gone off. So wait, could you do that again? Hands up, stick shaker's gone off. So 3 of you, 4 of you. And did any of you not turn the plane around or come back and land when that happened? Raise your hand if you kept going. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to make note that no one raised their hand in terms of continuing the flight. And the reason I ask that question is that in both accidents, stick shakers went off and the planes didn't turn around. And I find that interesting that that in this case the planes didn't turn around. Mr. Elwell, there's been a lot of confusing information in the news media regarding what happened. And I've read a few times where there has been reference to, quote, self-certification. Could you clarify that? Do companies self-certify their own aircraft?
Mr. Graves, no, sir, they don't. We don't have a program of self-certification. ODA empowers private individuals at a company that has an ODA program to do certain tasks and make certain decisions. They are delegated with that authority that we then oversee. And this isn't something that we give lightly. To be granted an ODA is a privilege that a company earns. We have about 79 or 80 of them, I think. And it's important to note that the vetting that is required of the individuals in an ODA program and the ODA program itself is very thorough and robust. And to your point, Mr. Chairman, we're not resting on that. We don't ever stay static on anything in the FAA safety related. So we'll continue to look at that. And I have to my right Mr. Earl Lawrence, who is our resident expert on ODA and the process, if I can allow him to elaborate.
Thank you. I'd like to build one point onto Mr. Elwell's comments, and it goes back to the Chairman Larson's comment earlier. In an ODA system, we don't have engineers reporting to just managers. We have engineers reporting to engineers. And those engineers all have to be approved and vetted by the FAA. So the head of an ODA is an engineer who has all those skills and experiences that has to be approved by FAA engineers as well.
Thank you. Mr. Elwell, another question. Again, a lot of interesting articles regarding the potential ungrounding of the MAX. Could you describe the steps that the plane would have to go through in order to be ungrounded or to be able to fly again?
Yes, sir. So I think that just to go back a little bit, it's important to lay the groundwork for it. We grounded the U.S. fleet when we had the data to establish a potential causal link between two accidents. That is the justification for a grounding. And it's important that you establish a link, because you then have what you need to mitigate, to unground, or to remove the prohibition order. So what we will do is we will receive Boeing's application for a design modification to the MCAS system, and we will thoroughly evaluate that and their system safety analysis. We will evaluate the training required to bring that, to certify that new software system. And once we have made our analysis, we've consulted with the TAB, which, by the way, is a third-party, third set of eyes that I think this committee recommended a month or two ago that should be employed in this instance, and we agree, and we initiated the TAB. And once we are absolutely convinced of the safety of return to service, then we'll do it.
Chairman Sumwalt, very quick, yes or no. Do you believe that there are processes, programs, or procedures that domestic airlines follow that may have prevented these based on your prevented these accidents based on your preliminary reports?
Ranking Member Graves, I apologize. Maybe it's my ears, maybe it's the acoustics in the room. I'm having difficulty hearing the question.
So we'll have to come back to it, but we will. I recognize Chair DeFazio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Elwell, we were both in the Air Force. You were a pilot. I wasn't. But my understanding is that the Air Force has a minimum of 2 angle of attack sensors on its planes, and sometimes as many as 4. Does that sound right to you?
So there are different numbers depending on the size of the aircraft.
Right, but never 1.
As far as I know, never 1.
Right.
The planes I flew in the Air Force had at least 2.
Okay. Then is the MCAS a safety critical system in your opinion?
I didn't make that designation, but it seems to me that yes, it is.
Okay, then why would it trigger with a single point of failure? I mean, isn't that kind of standard that we never have a safety critical system trigger off a single point of failure?
Yes, sir. A single point of failure means that if that component or that part of the aircraft fails, it will lead to an accident.
Well, in this case, it led to triggering the MCAS, which is safety critical. Here, let me read you something. I got this from a very, very experienced 737 pilot. If MCAS is not stopped by the pilots at the completion of 2 full MCAS cycles, 10 seconds pause, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, horizontal stabilizer is at or very close to the full nose-down limit of travel. At this point, the pilots do not have enough elevator authority to overcome the horizontal stabilizer, and the nose of the aircraft will continue to fall. The aircraft is no longer controllable in pitch. The only possible recovery is trim the aircraft nose up so the horizontal stabilizer moves to a flyable position. This pilot would characterize an MCAS runaway as having high potential to result in a drastic, abrupt maneuver. That sounds pretty radical. I mean, now, why, in this case, the argument is the pilots are supposed to correct the system, but until after Lion Air, the pilots didn't know the system was installed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the pilots also didn't know that the disagree light didn't work unless you bought the optional package of safety, which included another set. You had both the disagree light, and then you had, I guess, digital gauges that showed what the angle of attack sensors were seeing or feeling or doing. So when did the FAA become aware that the disagree light wasn't working, which had been on, I guess, all previous models of the 737?
Sir, if I could go back to the 737 pilot.
Yep.
I wasn't a 737 pilot in my commercial days, but I had the opportunity to fly the MAX sim a month or so ago. And I would I would offer on the mechanics of it that at the moment that a pilot, and we're trained our entire careers, the moment you feel the airplane doing something you didn't command it to do, you instinctively trim in the other direction. And if it doesn't work, you do a memory procedure called runaway stab trim. Right. So I'm not going to take issue with his comments about two bursts of the MCAS, what it might do, but I know as a pilot...
That's an elapsed time period of 20 seconds.
Yeah,
it's 20 seconds.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty quick. And if you're at a low altitude, I think it's, pretty... But let's go back to the issue of
disagree.
When the FAA was informed by Boeing. Boeing knew, I believe, about a year before they informed the FAA that the disagree light didn't work. Yeah.
So, sir, we've looked at this, and software engineers discovered the anomaly, and the anomaly was tied to the MCAS software. Part of the change of the
right, but the question, I get that. I mean, we can get into details, but the point is, a year elapsed before Boeing told the FAA. What actions did the FAA take at that point in time? Did you consider that inappropriate behavior by Boeing?
Sir, I'm concerned that it took a year, and we're looking into that, and we're going to fix that. Once we learned that the light was not operable, then we made the decision that it is not a safety-critical display. It's not a safety-critical display. It is advisory. There are no actions that the pilot takes to an AOA disagree light. And so it did not...
Well, it would alert them to that whatever the runaway problem is due to at that point, the angle of attack indicators.
Actually, the notice of that is tactile. One yoke is shaking and the other isn't. That is, by definition, AOA disagree. So the light is advisory.
Okay, then why is it there at all?
It's good for maintenance. So if you get an AOA disagree light in flight, you know to tell maintenance on the ground, hey, check, one of these is not calibrated correctly or is off.
So then really you don't think it's significant that Boeing didn't tell people the system was in the plane and didn't tell people that the disagree light didn't work? None of that was problematic.
I think that's an issue, sir, and we're going to look into it. It shouldn't take a year for us to find out that that discovery was made.
I appreciate that, and I really would want to know the answer. And in fact, there's the Dallas News, and this is off of a tape recording, so I think it's accurate. This was pilots talking to, after they found out that there was an MCAS system in the plane after Lion Air, talking to a Boeing engineer, and they said, why wouldn't you tell us about the system? I don't know that understanding this system would have changed the outcome. He said, in a million miles, you're going to maybe fly this airplane, maybe you're once going to see this ever. We try not to overload the crews with information that's unnecessary. I mean, do we really think that that was unnecessary, that it wasn't even in the manual and they didn't know about it? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that manual that you don't really need to know.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I can't comment on that conversation, and I think you were quoting Boeing. I, as a pilot, when I first heard about this, I thought that there should have been more text in the manual about EMCAS. I agree.
And Mr. Lawrence, in response to the chairman, you said that the engineer reports to an engineer. Can that engineer to which the report is rendered also be a manager at Boeing?
They would be a manager in the organizational delegation organization.
Could they have managerial status at Boeing and they're paid by Boeing? Is that correct?
They are paid by Boeing. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Just one other question. Now, we've had 14, if we could put up on the screen the flight deck 67, flight deck 17. Well, I thought we were going to put it up. But anyway, I have it here. You can't see it, but you'd be familiar with it. We're getting used to our new electronics. But when you think of it, there it is now. Pretty different airplanes. They're computer screens, GPS, everything's digital. The other's analog. Very, very different planes. And this is 14 variations later. And I think we've got to question the system where if you took the 737-100 and compared it to a MAX, you would say, wow, these are different types. But we sort of gradually got there, kept moving and moving and moving through 14 variations, and never determined that it would have to go through a more rigorous process as a new type, and including pilot retraining and those sorts of things. I mean, doesn't that raise some questions about how you kind of get this creep over 14 variations over however many years that is, 67, 42 years?
Sir, I know that begs the question. I would remind, though, that the amended type certificate of the MAX was amending the NG. And if you had the NG and the MAX side by side, then you could see the similarities. They're so close as to be amended.
It wasn't the NG amended from the 900,
Correct.
Which was amended from the 876 down to 1. So, I mean, that's kind of it's kind of a creep, it seems to me. I think there's a question there that we should look at.
Well, and as I said before, in the beginning of your questions, we welcome that examination. If there's something wrong with the extension of a family, and of course, that's something that the 737 has multiple iterations. But again, we're certifying to the last one.
Okay. All right. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I know we have a 5-minute rule. I've indulged the chair. I have 8.5 minutes, and I want to afford that for the ranking member of the committee as well. So recognize Mr. Graves, the ranking member, for up to 8.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we bring that back up on the screen? Because we keep focusing on the angle of attack indicator. So if you see on the right, the 737 MAX, that screen in front of both the pilot and the co-pilot with the blue above and the brown below, that's your primary angle of attack indicator. That's your artificial horizon. Every aircraft out there has to have that to be certified. The one on the left, the older version, that's digital on the right. The one on the left is what we call analog. And if you see the circle in front of both the pilot and the co-pilot, and there's white above and black below, it's the same thing. That's your artificial horizon. That's your primary angle of attack indicator. In fact, all my years of flying, I don't think I've ever had an actual, what we're talking about, angle of attack indicator in any of the aircraft I've ever flown. But what's interesting too is, and we fail to, and I go back to this, you got to know how to fly the plane. In Ethiopia Airlines incident, you can look outside. That's a critical angle of attack indication right there. Look outside the airplane when you're flying it. You can tell if you're at a critical angle of attack because you're going to be pitched up. You're getting close to a stall situation. Those are your two main angle of attack indicators. First of all, look outside when you're flying the plane. And second of all, look at your artificial horizon. And I guess my first question is for Administrator Allwell. And at this point, we know, and we always know, there's so many other things to look at in these investigations. You know, not just FAA certification activities with the 737 MAX, but many, many other things. And what I want to get to is the preliminary report shows that there were a lot of misidentifications on what was occurring in the aircraft and misapplications of safety procedures and training in itself. And as a pilot, I want you to talk to us as a pilot. Can you provide us some context as to what actions or inactions by the pilots or the airline, for that matter, also require some close examination in the course of this investigation?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. As a pilot, I mentioned a little bit earlier that in the U.S., training focuses on hand flying, manual flying. There are other parts of the world and other countries that focus on flight control management. But in the U.S., from the first training you do as a pilot, Air Force for me, but it's the same in civil, it's flying the aircraft. And what was going on, it's already been pointed out that there was a false indication of a stall, immediately recognizable to the trained pilot as a false indication because one yoke was shaking, the other wasn't. What concerns me about the the data from the flight data recorder is the apparent lack of recognition of runaway stab trim. Runaway stab trim is taught at the earliest stages of aircraft that have stab trim motors. And it is so important, to Chairman DeFazio's point about elapsed time, it's so important that you don't pull out a checklist, you don't open and look at what next. It's memorized, and you're tested on it all the time, and you turn off those stab trim motors. In the Lion Air accident, it's significant that even though the airplane was pitching against the pilot's commands, that's classic runaway stab trim, the stab trim motors in 13 minutes were never turned off. And I think you made the point, sir, in your remarks that in the case of the Ethiopian Air flight, they did turn them off, although they didn't adhere to the emergency AD that we put out on November 8th. They did turn the stab trims off, but they never controlled their airspeed, and then subsequently, about a minute before the end of the flight, they turned them back on. Both of those things are unfortunate, obviously, and I have to point out, in deference to my colleague here to my left, Chairman Sumwell, these investigations are ongoing. And as you said, there are so many pieces to any accident. I've never looked at an accident where there weren't 3 or 4 or 5 links of the chain, any one of which, if it hadn't gone wrong, the plane would have survived. So we know that there's going to be, and there are, factors. But as a pilot, as you asked me, that's what I saw. The lack of control on the speed on Ethiopian, and the inability, the apparent not doing the stab trim cutout switch procedure.
We come back to, and we keep coming back to it and forgetting that, once they set those throttles to full power, they never retarded them. And I've used the analogy before. When you're in a car and you're speeding towards a brick wall, full speed, you're going to take your foot off the gas. That's what most people would do. But they accelerated right through their certified maximum speed of the Max 8 and just kept on accelerating throughout the entire process. That aircraft kept accelerating. And when you get those kind of pressures against the control surfaces, it makes it very, very hard to do manually. And, and again, this comes back to so many times. Pilot training, this is what worries me more than anything else. And I hate to disparage, another country and what their pilot training is, but that's what scares me in all of this, is climbing on an aircraft or an airline, that is outside U.S. Jurisdiction. I know what we have in the U.S., and I know what we are capable of, and I know the quality of our pilots and what they have to go through to get to that point. And I just think it just bothers me. Here we are, we continue to tear down our system based on, what has happened in another country, 2 other countries, and particularly given the qualifications and, and what we're learning about the training standards. But that last part was more editorial than anything else, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Graves. I now recognize Representative Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, we don't want to tear down our system. We want to restore confidence in our system, Mr. Ewell. And I'm sure you are concerned that this impressive record may well be shattered. I regard it as a purpose of this hearing, as your answers to help us, if we can, restore confidence in a system that, by the way, most members, maybe except me, use every single week to go back and forth to the Congress. So this loss of confidence, despite this wonderful 10-year record, seems to have been shattered. And so just let me ask you a question preliminarily, Mr. Elwell. I think most members of the public, after one crash, would have said, oh, that's unusual. Well, just 2 crashes. Why did it take so long compared to other countries that made the decision almost immediately after the Ethiopian Airlines accident. In fact, as I recall it, the president made the announcement, but as is his wont, he probably was perhaps preempting the FAA, but that's where the announcement came from. If anything, it signaled the importance that somebody should speak up. So I think the public, which will be interested in this hearing, wants to know, why did it take you so long after the Ethiopian Airlines accident? Explain that to this committee.
Ms. Norton, thank you for that question. The FAA is a data-driven, risk-based systems approach to all things safety. When we take an action, and whether it's the grounding of an aircraft or an airworthiness directive or...
Other countries weren't data-driven? That's the difference between you and other countries?
I can't speak to the decision-making of other countries. I can tell you this, a number of countries that grounded their 737 MAX fleets called us immediately after and asked what data we had. Several countries asked after grounding their fleets, what are we going to need?
That means that they were looking at real-time, real-life evidence, even if it may have contradicted the data. Are you still as reliant on data as you were then compared to other countries? Today, would you be reliant only on data?
Well, ma'am, that's a great question. We made our decision to ground the aircraft when we had the data that linked the two flights, data to link the flights. But we weren't just sitting waiting for the cockpit voice recorder or the flight data recorder. We were examining, as the regulator of our 737 MAX fleet, what's going on with our fleet. And we drew data on 57,000 flights, and we were talking constantly with our neighbor to the north.
That was after the first?
From the first accident, but up through Ethiopia, to find out, are we, the fleet that I am responsible for regulating, are they experiencing any anomalies? And there were zero in 57,000 flights.
Could I ask you this, Mr. Elwell?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Could I ask you this then? Okay. Again, we see reliance, and I would say perhaps over-reliance on data. Did the president make this call, or did the FAA make this call?
FAA's the safety regulator. FAA made the call to ground.
And he only made the announcement. Is that what you're saying? You were prepared to make that call yourself after the second accident?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, he preempted you, but you were prepared to do it. You wouldn't have waited for a third accident. The data told you after the second accident.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Could I ask you, Mr. Elwell, does the FAA mandate pilot training on all of its systems in which, and this was news to me, in which the pilot is considered the redundancy for the system's failure? Most of us didn't know that the pilot was so considered.
Mr. Elwell, you have to take that question for the record.
I'm sorry, sir?
You'll have to take the question for the record.
Okay.
And recognize Mr. Mitchell, Representative Mitchell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The effectiveness, the success of the aviation system in North America has been based on safety, reliability, and transparency of decision-making, both in terms of certification of aircraft, pilot qualifications, and when there are incidents. Mr. Elwell, you recall last week there was a briefing for members of the committee on the 737 MAX certification. I asked a question. I asked what the FAA had done in the process of reviewing and certifying the MCAS system. To be honest with you, sir, I got a whole description of what the system didn't do, but I didn't get an answer to my question. At no point did I. And then we're greeted by, as Mr. Fazio notes, this Wall Street Journal article. So I'll ask the question again. I'll ask it for the record, and I will ask you to submit in writing to the committee what were the steps the FAA took in reviewing the MCAS system and the accompanying training. Because I've asked it now 3 times, and to be blunt with you, sir, with all due respect, I haven't gotten a direct answer, and the committee deserves it.
We will get that answer for you, sir.
That would be deeply appreciated, and I'd like it straight up. What was the engagement in the system throughout the process in detail? Don't worry about boring me. I don't believe the chair is going to be bored by reading this. I certainly am not. We need to understand that because there's a critical component of this.
Yeah, I can assure you that the MCAS system was examined and certified because it was a new system to the MAX.
It was.
And we retained it, and we had the oversight of that, and we certified it.
Well, as you may recall, I asked the question and didn't get an answer that was anywhere close to satisfactory. I'd appreciate it. Let's transition to, as is noted, the 737 MAX has flown 57,000 flights in North America without an incident. Part of the difference is the training of the aviators, the pilots. I mean, I've done some instruction. I don't have a pilot's license. I don't have enough time. But what's clearly made to me is first thing you aviate, you fly the plane. Then you navigate, then you communicate. So, yeah, I've seen a stick shaker. They made me do it. It's interesting. I'm concerned that, and I'm trying to be respectful because they're deceased. The pilot in command of the Ethiopian Air was 29 years old and was reported to have 8,100 and change hours of flight. Now, let me give you some examples. Close friends of mine are commercial pilots, flew for major corporations. He's 58, has 17,000 hours. The other gentleman is 63, also flew for major corporations in private flight. Is 63 years old, has 20,000 hours. The first officer had 361 hours. Do we not have concerns with not only the training of pilots in other nations, but the reliability of their logs to try and claim 8,100 hours at age 29? How many pilots do you know have over 8,000 hours at 29 years of age?
Mr. Mitchell, I don't know anybody 29 years old that has 8,100 hours, but I'm not going to say that that's not possible. And the answer to your question is, do we want to examine and take a very hard look at the training standards globally? Yes, absolutely. We've been involved. The U.S. has led on pilot training for many years, and we do that at the International Civil Aviation Organization, the UN body that provides the guidance for standards around the world.
I think it needs to be an issue that we address with ICAO and as we deal with this, because clearly with the disparities concerning to me. One quick question, I guess I would also ask you to assert this for the record because time is going to run short. In reference to my colleague's question, part of the reason for the delay or the delayed response in the United States is we got our data from Canada, did we not?
Indirectly, yes, sir.
We didn't have the data, the same level of specificity that Canada had because we don't have access to that system that they use for their traffic control, correct?
We do have access to it, sir, but Canada got it first because it came from a company that the air traffic services in Canada
You submit that whole process, that whole timeline in writing to the committee, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. One last comment. I believe that we've got the most advanced aviation system in the world. We'll find multiple factors that contribute to this terrible tragedy. One of which will be we didn't see things that could have come up. It's hard to sometimes have a crystal ball. But when you do recertify this aircraft, I will be among the first to buy a ticket to fly in the plane because I have faith in our aviation system, I have faith in the FAA, and I have faith in Boeing and the aircraft they fly. I'll buy one, I'll fly it somewhere to make the point that we have to trust our aviation system. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sitting here in front of the family of a victim of one of the crashes of a 737 MAX and looking at the pictures of the victims, it's crystal clear that what the responsibility of the FAA, the NTSB, and our committee is right now. We need to get to the bottom of what happened so we can do whatever we can to ensure the safety of air passengers. And from what we know so far, it seems to me at least, although there sounds like there have been other factors, but it seems that something went wrong with the FAA's safety certification of the 737 MAX, and 346 people died. We need to figure out what went wrong. If it was the certification process itself, we need to fix it to avoid a repeat. if it was the problem with the lack of compliance with the process, then we have to hold accountable whoever it was that was not compliant, the FAA and or Boeing. In addition, further steps must be taken to ensure compliance. Now, this is not a legal proceeding here, and I know that we're in the early stages of the investigation of the crashes and the certification of the MAX. But stories we've heard about the process of certification so far are troubling. The guiding principle of the FAA and manufacturers must be safety, not getting a highly valued plane out more quickly. A question was raised earlier by Chairman DeFazio about why the 737 MAX was not required to get its own type certificate. To me, this is very troubling. It seems to me that because it didn't have to get its own type certificate, it could move more quickly through the process. Now, I'm not a pilot, and I'll defer to the pilots on this committee when it comes to issues of their experience as pilots, but I am a mechanical engineer. I know that this plane, Boeing needed to compete with Airbus. In order to have a more fuel-efficient planes, they put new engines on the plane. The engines had to be put further forward on the wings. These changes in aerodynamics caused the need for the MCAS system. And it seems to me that the MCAS system fundamentally changes the way the Boeing 737 flies. How is this not a major change that required a new type certificate?
Well, thank you for that question, Mr. Lipinski, and I'm glad you asked it because, and I appreciate that you're an engineer. Actually, the MCAS was put into the 737 MAX for the opposite reason. It doesn't make it fly differently. The MCAS was designed into the airplane to make it fly and feel for the pilots exactly like the NG.
Yes, but it was a change. It was a fundamental change to how it flies. I understand it was put in there to try to make it fly the same way, but the system itself was a change.
So the MCAS was added to a system that is on the NG called the speed trim system. It is, and I'm not an engineer, but it is a layer below, a software layer below the speed trim system. And as you said, the MCAS was put in because the engines brought the CG a little bit forward on the airplane. The test flights demonstrated that in a high angle of attack regime, the yoke didn't feel the same to the pilots as the NG. The MCAS pushed the nose over so that the controllability and the feel in the yoke would be the same. And the flight test pilots deemed that it was identical, and then the Flight Standardization Board pilots, which were actually line pilots that we enlisted to fly both planes, came to the same conclusion.
Well, I'm hopeful that this was not a situation where the desire was just to get the plane out more quickly, that it wasn't a situation where safety was not the priority, because that must be the priority. As I said, for the FAA, for the manufacturer, safety must be the priority. I understand how important Boeing is as an American company, but safety must always come first.
Sir, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, sir.
Representative Spano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I too want to extend my sincere condolences and regrets to the members of the family who are here today. Can't imagine what you're going through, and thank you for being here. Very grateful that you're here. My first question is to Mr. Elwell. Can you help me understand, describe in a little bit more detail the FAA's delegation authority? What are the things we delegate? What are the things that we don't delegate? Those things that we do delegate, how does the FAA oversee the actions of designees? Just generally, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that question. The key word in your question, detail, begs that after I introduce it, I'd like to hand off the detail of the ODA to Earl, who is our resident expert. I will just start by saying the Organizational Designation Authority, as it's come to be known, ODA, is a long-standing principle in certification, and it is a way in which the FAA leverages the expertise within the manufacturing entity. It's very important we understand that without leveraging their engineering expertise, it would be virtually impossible to have the system that we have today. So as far as the details of how the ODA is administered, Earl?
I appreciate that, and I appreciate it's a long-standing process, but I think the public would like to know so that they can have some level of confidence that the FAA is doing the job we expect them to do. What is delegated, what is not, how do we oversee that?
Thank you.
So thank you for the question, because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding of our delegation process. I'd like to simplify our CERT process in 4 key areas, and the first and foremost is setting the standards. What are the rules and requirements for any design to meet? Next are another layer of test protocols and standards, so it's how you're going to show compliance. The third level is the actual doing of the tests and the calculations. And then the fourth is the overview of all those results and the approval. Only in that third level, the actual doing of a test is where delegation is used. FAA is fully responsible for setting the standards that all tests must comply with and setting the standards for the minimum safety for that aircraft and then reviewing it all in the end. We never give up that authority. We take advantage of the expertise of the people who are actually building and designing the aircraft to assist us in reviewing those tests and those procedures, particularly on things that have been done over and over and over again over many years. I want to highlight that it took us 5 years and over 110,000 man-hours to certify the 737 MAX. I don't think that was a quick process or just cursory review. We apply the same rigorous standards on whether it's a derivative design or original design, and I'm proud of my team for their abilities and their expertise in reviewing any certification project.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Next question is for Chairman Sumwall. If you would just help me understand, over the last maybe 2 or 3 decades, what's the state of commercial airline safety here in the United States? Give us, if you would, a brief sketch in 1 minute and 12 seconds.
Well, I think generally speaking, the state of the airline industry in the United States over the last few decades has increasingly gotten safer and safer. That, as it was pointed out earlier, we had 1 fatality in the past decade. 1 is too many. And of course, we have the families of the Colgan 3407 crash here. There was 50 lives lost there. So it's good, but good is not good enough.
And then one final question. It's been mentioned that we can't control necessarily some of the pilot training protocols abroad. Are there any mechanisms, if any, that we have at our disposal to ensure that other countries, do require their pilots to have the training that we feel is appropriate? And if so, what are those mechanisms?
Yes, ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, outlines the standards and recommended practices for member states to follow. There are 193 states that are subscribers to or signatories to ICAO.
And you can get us further information on that as well. We're also remind the subcommittee that we've asked through a bipartisan letter to the DOT-IG for the international pilot training standards and some other information as well. We get that, we'll share it with the full committee. Recognize Representative Cohen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Express my sadness at the loss of the individuals and for the parents to be present here and all the relatives. Mr. Elwell, I believe it was every country grounded the MAX before we did. Every country. Is it because they were too quick to draw a conclusion from 2 airplanes?
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us on fox29.com and the Fox 29 app, as well as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for the latest breaking news. And we'll see you again here tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 a.m. And thanks for joining us.